I remember the exact moment my husband decided my life was no longer worth saving. It was not dramatic the way people imagine betrayal to be. There was no shouting, no slammed door, no final cruel sentence sharp enough to cut the air in half. It was quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that made it worse. I was lying in a private recovery room at St. Mercy Hospital in Chicago, my chest wrapped in tight bandages, my throat dry from the breathing tube they had removed only hours earlier, and every breath felt like I was pulling air through broken glass. The machines beside me beeped in steady little rhythms, proving I was alive even when my body felt unsure about continuing. The room smelled like antiseptic, plastic, cold metal, and fear. My husband, Daniel, stood near the foot of my bed in his dark gray coat, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone like he was waiting for an appointment to end. I tried to lift my hand toward him, but my fingers barely moved. "Daniel," I whispered, or at least I tried to whisper. My voice came out cracked and weak, barely louder than the machine beside me. He looked up slowly, not with worry, not with love, not even with pity. He looked at me the way a person looks at a bill they have already decided not to pay. Before the surgery, he had held my hand in front of the nurses and told me everything would be fine. He had kissed my forehead and said, "I'll be right here when you wake up." I had believed him because I had spent 6 years believing Daniel Carter was a good man, the kind of man who knew how to protect what belonged to him. When I woke up, the chair beside my bed was empty, and when he finally returned, his face carried no relief, only calculation. A nurse came in with papers and spoke softly to him near the door. I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. Insurance, responsibility, continued treatment, outstanding balance. Daniel's voice was low and controlled. Then he said the sentence that changed my life. "I'm not responsible for any more of her bills." At first, my mind refused to understand it. Maybe the medication was too strong. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe he meant something else. But the nurse looked at him in shock, then glanced at me with the kind of sadness strangers use when they know something about your life before you do. Daniel signed something on the clipboard, placed the pen down, and turned toward the door. I tried to call his name again. He paused just for a second and looked back. There was no apology in his eyes, only annoyance, as if my survival had become an inconvenience. Then he walked out. I waited for him to come back. I waited through the next hour and the one after that. I waited until the sky outside the window turned from pale winter afternoon to deep blue evening. No calls, no messages, no explanation. Later, the nurse told me he had left instructions that he would not be returning and that I should contact my own family for support. But I had no family close enough to save me. My parents were gone. My only sister lived across the country and was drowning in her own life. Daniel knew that. He knew I had no one. He knew I had just survived open-heart surgery. He knew one complication, one unpaid procedure, one delay in treatment could kill me. And he left anyway. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the machines count the seconds Daniel had abandoned me. I thought about our wedding day, about the way he cried when I walked down the aisle, about the house we bought together, about the baby names we once laughed over even though we never had children. I thought about how quickly love can become evidence against you when the person you trusted was only acting. By midnight, the pain medication had worn thin, and the truth had settled into my bones. My husband had not panicked. He had not made a mistake. He had made a choice. He had left me to die because, for some reason I did not yet understand, he needed me gone. The next morning, I woke to voices outside my room. One belonged to the nurse who had been kind to me since surgery, a woman named Rachel with tired eyes and a habit of calling every patient honey, even when she was angry. The other voice was unfamiliar. Male, calm, educated, expensive. "She is in no condition to speak with anyone," Rachel said firmly. "I understand," the man replied, "but if I wait any longer, she may lose more than her health." Something about that sentence made my eyes open fully. A moment later, the door moved, and a man stepped inside carrying a leather folder under one arm. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, tall, with silver at his temples and the kind of tailored navy suit that did not need a logo to announce its cost. His face was serious, but not cruel. He closed the door behind him and stood a few feet from my bed as if he was careful not to scare me. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. I nodded weakly. "My name is Jonathan Reed. I'm an attorney based here in Chicago." I stared at him, confused and exhausted. "I don't have a lawyer." "No," he said quietly, "but you have one now." He placed the folder on the small table beside my bed. "Your remaining hospital balance has been paid in full. Emergency cardiac care, recovery care, rehabilitation, all of it. $500,000 has been placed in a medical trust under your name so no one can interrupt your treatment." I blinked at him. For a few seconds I thought I was dreaming. "Who paid it?" I asked. Jonathan's expression changed slightly, not softening exactly, but tightening with something like sadness. "A man who owed your mother a promise." My mother had been dead for 8 years. Hearing her mentioned in that hospital room felt like a hand reaching out of the past. "You knew my mother?" "Not well," he said, "but my client did." "What client?" Jonathan opened the folder and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges, with my full maiden name written across the front in handwriting I did not recognize. Emily Rose Whitmore, not Emily Carter. Whitmore, the name I had not used since marrying Daniel. "Before I answer that," Jonathan said, "I need to ask you something. Has your husband tried to make you sign anything recently? Estate papers, medical forms, property transfers, power of attorney?" My heart began to beat harder, and the monitor beside me betrayed it with faster beeps. "He brought papers last week," I whispered. "Before surgery. He said they were standard hospital forms in case something went wrong." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Did you sign them?" I was scared. "He said we didn't have time." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, as if he had expected the answer and hated being right. "Mrs. Carter, those were not standard hospital forms." The room seemed to tilt. I remembered Daniel standing beside my bed the night before surgery, gentle and patient, guiding the pen into my hand. I had been crying. He had stroked my hair and told me not to worry about details. I signed wherever he pointed because I thought love meant trusting someone when you were too afraid to think. Jonathan pulled another document from the folder. "Your husband filed paperwork attempting to transfer your interest in your home, your joint investment account, and any future inheritance claims into his sole control in the event of medical incapacity." "Future inheritance," I repeated. "I don't have an inheritance." Jonathan looked at me carefully. "That is what Daniel wanted you to believe." My mouth went dry. For years, Daniel had handled everything financial. He said he was better with numbers, better with banks, better with legal language. I worked as a school counselor before my health collapsed, and I never cared about wealth. We were comfortable, not rich, and I had always believed everything we owned came from Daniel's consulting job and careful planning. Jonathan's face told me there was another story underneath the life I thought I knew. He opened the envelope and removed a letter. "Your mother's older brother, Arthur Whitmore, died 3 months ago," he said. "He was not just an old family relative. He was the founder of Whitmore Logistics, one of the largest private shipping networks in the Midwest." The name struck something faint in my memory. My mother had once mentioned an Uncle Arthur, but only in fragments. A family disagreement. A silence, a man who had chosen business over blood. Arthur had no children, Jonathan continued. His wife passed years ago. His will names one primary heir. He slid the paper toward me. My eyes moved slowly over the lines until they stopped on my name. Emily Rose Whitmore Carter, primary beneficiary. My lungs forgot how to work. No, I whispered. That's impossible. Your husband found out before you did, Jonathan said. And based on what he filed, he planned to control it before you were healthy enough to ask questions. I stared at the ceiling, and for the first time since surgery, the pain in my chest felt smaller than the pain in my mind. Daniel had not left me because hospital bills were too expensive. He had left because he thought I was worth more dead or helpless than alive. Jonathan did not tell me everything that day. He said my body could not handle it all at once, and for once in my life, a man made a decision for me that did not feel like a theft. But he did leave me with copies of the documents Daniel had made me sign, and every page felt like proof that the marriage I had been grieving had never existed the way I remembered it. Over the next week, while nurses helped me sit up, walk 3 steps, breathe through pain, and swallow pills that made the world blur, Jonathan came every afternoon with another piece of the truth. My Uncle Arthur had spent years trying to find me after my mother died, but every letter he sent had been returned. Every call had been blocked. Every private investigator hit a wall built from changed addresses, closed accounts, and legal notices claiming I wanted no contact. Daniel and I had moved twice during those years. Daniel had always said it was for work. Now Jonathan showed me records proving Daniel had known about Arthur's search. He had intercepted at least 2 letters. He had spoken to Arthur's office once, pretending to be protecting me from a painful family history. He told them you wanted nothing to do with the Whitmore name, Jonathan said. I wanted to say Daniel would never do that, but the words would not come. The man who had left me in a hospital bed had already answered that question. Then came the next truth. Daniel was not acting alone. His mother, Margaret Carter, had helped him. Margaret had always been elegant, sharp, and cold in the polished way wealthy women can be cold while still calling it manners. She never liked me. She smiled at family dinners, complimented my dresses, sent gifts on birthdays, but her eyes always measured me like I was a temporary stain on her son's future. When Daniel and I married, she told me, Carter men need strong wives, not needy ones. I thought she meant I should be confident. Now I understood she meant I should be useful and silent. 2 days after Jonathan's first visit, Margaret appeared at the hospital wearing a cream coat, pearl earrings, and a face full of fake concern. Rachel nearly stopped her at the door, but Margaret swept in like rules were for smaller people. Emily, darling, she said, placing one gloved hand dramatically over her heart. I came as soon as I could. I looked at her and remembered that Daniel had left me to die. I remembered that she had raised him. Where is Daniel? I asked. Her expression flickered for less than a second. He's devastated. Men handle fear differently. He signed away responsibility for my treatment. Margaret sighed, as if I were being unreasonable after a minor misunderstanding. Medical costs can be complicated. Daniel was overwhelmed. He hasn't called. Because you need rest. She sat beside my bed without asking. And that is exactly why I'm here. Jonathan Reed has been filling your head with confusion at a vulnerable time. You should let family handle this. Family. The word made something inside me go cold. She opened her handbag and removed a packet of papers. There are some temporary authorizations we need you to sign, just practical things. Daniel can manage the house and accounts while you recover. It will protect you. I almost laughed. The same trap wrapped in softer paper. My fingers trembled under the blanket, but my voice stayed quiet. "Leave them with my lawyer." Margaret's eyes hardened. "Your lawyer?" "Jonathan Reed." The softness disappeared from her face like someone had blown out a candle. "That man has no loyalty to you. He is using an old family matter to create conflict in your marriage." "My marriage ended when Daniel walked out." Margaret leaned closer. Her perfume was expensive and suffocating. "Be careful, Emily. You are ill, you are emotional. Courts do not always favor women who make wild accusations after surgery." There it was, the threat beneath the pearls. I felt fear, yes, but underneath it something else was beginning to grow. A small, steady anger. Not hot, not reckless, clean. "Get out," I said. Margaret stared at me as if she had never considered I might speak to her that way. "Excuse me? Get out of my room." For a moment, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she stood, smoothed her coat, and smiled. "You will regret choosing strangers over family." After she left, Rachel came in and found me shaking so badly she had to steady my water cup. I did not cry until Jonathan arrived that evening. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood the size of the cage Daniel and Margaret had built around me. They had cut me off from my past, hidden my inheritance, controlled my paperwork, and waited until my heart was literally open on an operating table to take everything. Jonathan listened without interrupting. Then he placed a small digital recorder on the table. "Your hospital room has security audio in the hallway," he said, "and Margaret just threatened you within range of it." For the first time in days, I looked at him with something close to hope. He opened his folder and said, "Now we stop defending. Now we start building the case." Became two things at once. By morning, I was a patient learning how to walk without collapsing. By afternoon, I was a woman learning how deeply her husband had betrayed her. Jonathan brought in a forensic accountant named Priya Shah, who spoke quickly, wore no makeup, and had the terrifying calm of someone who enjoyed destroying liars with spreadsheets. She found shell accounts connected to Daniel's consulting company. She found transfers from my small savings account into investment vehicles I had never approved. She found that Daniel had increased my life insurance policy 6 months earlier and changed the notification address to his office. She found emails between Daniel and Margaret discussing my medical vulnerability in language so cold it made me nauseous. They never wrote anything obvious like "let her die." People like them were too careful for that. Instead, they wrote about outcomes, access, control, and timing. Margaret wrote one line that I read over and over until the words carved themselves into me. "If the surgery goes poorly, Daniel must be positioned before Reed interferes." Jonathan had been right. Daniel did not panic in that hospital room. He had been waiting for a window. But the worst discovery came from my own house. I had not been back since the surgery, and I dreaded it because I knew every room would smell like Daniel's lies. Jonathan arranged for a private nurse to take me there for 1 hour, just long enough to collect personal items before filing emergency motions to stop Daniel from selling or transferring anything. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. White siding, black shutters, frozen garden beds, the porch swing Daniel installed the summer after our wedding. Inside, everything felt staged. My favorite blanket folded too neatly. My desk drawer cleaned out. My laptop missing. Daniel had tried to erase the version of me that could prove anything. But he did not know my mother as well as he thought. Years before she died, she had given me a small wooden recipe box filled with index cards in her handwriting. I kept it in the pantry because looking at it hurt too much, and Daniel had never cared about cooking. That day, while the nurse packed clothes, I opened the box for reasons I could not explain. Behind cards for lemon cake, chicken soup, and rosemary bread, I found an envelope I had never noticed. It had my mother's handwriting on the front, for Emily when the past comes knocking. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. Inside was a photograph of my mother as a young woman standing beside a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. On the back she had written, "Arthur loved you even when I was too proud to let him close." There was also a letter. My mother explained that her brother Arthur had wanted to support us after my father died, but she had refused because of an old fight about money and pride. She wrote that if anything ever happened to her, I should find Arthur because he was family, and family should not stay broken forever. At the bottom of the envelope was an old business card for Whitmore Logistics. I sat on the pantry floor holding the letter against my chest, grieving my mother in a new way. Not because she had lied to me, but because she had left a door open and Daniel had spent years making sure I never found it. Then I heard voices outside. Daniel had come home. I froze. The nurse stepped into the hallway, startled, but Daniel was already inside with Margaret behind him. He stopped when he saw me on the pantry floor. For one brief second, his face showed shock. Then he rearranged himself into concern. "Emily," he said softly, "you shouldn't be here." I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had kissed my scars before I even had them, the man who had stood by my hospital bed and decided I was disposable. He looked tired but not broken. He looked annoyed that I had survived the scene he had written for me. "Where's my laptop?" I asked. His jaw tightened. Margaret stepped forward. "This is exactly what I warned you about. You're not well enough to understand what's happening." I used the counter to pull myself up. My chest screamed with pain, but I stayed standing. "I understand perfectly." Daniel lowered his voice. "Emily, Jonathan is manipulating you. I left the hospital because I was scared. I made mistakes with paperwork, but I was trying to protect us. You signed away my care. I was overwhelmed. You stole my mail from Arthur Whitmore." His face changed. Not much, just enough. Margaret saw it too. Her eyes flashed with fury, not at him for doing it, but at him for revealing it. That tiny reaction gave me more confirmation than any document. I smiled, and Daniel looked frightened for the first time. "You should leave," I said. "This is my house too," he snapped. "Not for long," Jonathan said from the doorway. Daniel turned. Jonathan stood there with 2 officers and a court order in his hand. "Emergency injunction," he said. "You are prohibited from removing, selling, transferring, altering, or destroying any marital property, financial records, digital devices, or documents connected to Emily Carter or the Whitmore estate." Margaret's face went white with rage. Daniel stared at the papers like they were written in fire, and I realized something powerful. They had spent years making me feel alone. But now, for the first time, they were the ones surrounded. The court hearing happened 12 days later, and by then the story Daniel had built was already collapsing. Jonathan had gathered the hospital documents, Margaret's recorded threat, the forged authorizations, the intercepted letters, the financial transfers, the life insurance changes, my mother's letter, and Priya's report showing a pattern of deliberate control. I was still weak, still moving slowly, still waking up at night with phantom pain in my chest, and Daniel's last cold look burned into my memory, but I was alive. That alone felt like an act of rebellion. Daniel arrived at court in a dark suit, clean-shaven, with a face practiced into sorrow. Margaret sat behind him, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, looking at me like I was an ungrateful investment. Their lawyer argued that Daniel had been under emotional stress, that I had misunderstood paperwork while medicated, that Jonathan Reed was exploiting a vulnerable woman for access to a valuable estate. Then Jonathan stood and quietly destroyed them. He did not shout. He did not perform. He simply placed fact after fact in front of the judge until the room had nowhere to hide from the truth. The hospital administrator confirmed Daniel had declined financial responsibility and left against medical advice. The nurse confirmed I had been frightened and confused after surgery. Priya explained the accounts Daniel had opened and the money he had moved. A handwriting expert explained how my signatures had been copied. Then Jonathan played the hallway audio of Margaret telling me courts did not favor emotional women after surgery. Hearing her voice echo through that courtroom was like watching a mask crack in public. For the first time, people turned to look at her not as a grieving mother-in-law, not as a concerned elder, but as what she was. A woman used to threatening quietly because she believed no one important would hear. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed enough of it to stand. Then came the final piece. Jonathan called a representative from Arthur Whitmore's estate, who testified that Arthur had attempted to contact me multiple times over the years, and that someone claiming to represent my wishes had blocked communication. Phone records connected those calls to Daniel's office. Email metadata connected the messages to Margaret's assistant. Daniel's face lost all color. The judge granted a protective order over my assets, froze Daniel's access to joint accounts, suspended the disputed transfers, and ordered a full investigation into fraud, coercion, and financial abuse. It was not the complete ending. Real justice never happens as quickly as stories make it seem, but it was the first crack in the wall they had built around me. After the hearing, Daniel followed me into the courthouse hallway. Jonathan moved to stop him, but I shook my head. I wanted to hear what a man says when he finally runs out of lies. Daniel's eyes were red, but I no longer trusted tears. "Emily," he said, "I loved you." I looked at him for a long moment. Once those words would have undone me. Once I would have searched his face for the man I married. But now I understood something painful and freeing. Love that only protects itself is not love. It is possession wearing perfume. "No," I said quietly. "You loved what you could take from me." He flinched. "I was scared." "So was I," said. "And you left me to die." He opened his mouth, but no answer came. Behind him, Margaret watched with hatred sharp enough to cut glass. I turned away from them both. 3 months later, I moved into a smaller house near the lake, not because I had to, but because I wanted walls that had never heard Daniel lie. My recovery was slow. Some mornings, pain still lived under my ribs like a warning. Some nights I woke up reaching for a man who had never truly been there. But every week I got stronger. Jonathan remained my attorney through the estate process, and Arthur Whitmore's inheritance was secured under my name, protected from Daniel's claims. The money was enormous, more than I could fully understand at first, but the number mattered less than what it represented. It was not just wealth. It was the life Daniel tried to steal before I even knew it belonged to me. Daniel was later charged in connection with forged documents and financial fraud. Margaret's investigation took longer, because women like her hide their fingerprints behind other people's hands, but several of her accounts were frozen, and her perfect social world began to turn its back on her. People who once praised her charity work stopped answering her calls. The Carter name, which she had protected like a crown, became a warning whispered in rooms she used to control. As for me, I did not become cruel. I did not become dramatic. I did not stand on a balcony laughing while my enemies fell. Real revenge was quieter than that. It was waking up in my own bed, breathing through my own repaired heart, signing my own name to documents no one could steal, and knowing that the woman Daniel left behind in that hospital room had not died. She had changed. Sometimes I still think about the moment he walked away, the sound of his shoes on the hospital floor, the empty chair beside my bed, the terrible silence after the door closed. For a while I thought that was the end of my story, but I was wrong. That was only the moment my old life stopped pretending to be real. The truth came after. The justice came after. And I came after everything they thought would break me.